Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first ever live session of the Critical Code Studies Working Group. This is the 2016 Critical Code Studies Working Group, and I am Mark Marino. I'm the director of the Humanities and Critical Code Studies Lab here at USC. And with me today is Jeremy Douglass, who I'll let introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Jeremy Douglass. I'm also helping to organize critical code studies this year and excited for our first live stream, breaking new ground.
Yeah, this is exciting. And if this goes well, we'll do more of these. And if it goes poorly, well, we'll
do more of these to
no doubt. No doubt. So the topic for today, first of all, I guess I should make sure that everybody knows how this works. So Jeremy and I are in a shared broadcast call right now, and folks who are watching, if you want to ask a question, we have made the Q&A tab available, so you should be able to place any questions there. If there's some problem with the connection you need to let us know about, I would say send us an email. We'll be checking that as well, in case you can't post questions or you want to access the stream through some other method. We can rearrange. Our plan for today was to do two things. One was to raise the question of annotating code with you, to talk about the challenges and possibilities for creative and critical annotations of code. And our second goal was and that we may actually do first, is to do a little poking around on a platform that Jeremy and I put together with Jessica Pressman, Lucas Miller, Craig Dietrich, and Eric Lawyer, called ACLS Workbench. This is a platform we premiered in 2014 with the working group, and it's a scalar-based multimedia platform on which they've added some special affordances for annotating code, which is a really wonderful thing. Back in 2012, I think we first premiered the concept with a reading of the Transporter Immigrant tool using the Scalar version 1, and we can share a link to that in just a bit. But since then, when we put together ACLS Workbench while writing Reading Project together, a book that Jessica, Jeremy, and I have written together, we realized that there were many more possibilities, and more importantly, that we needed to think about, first of all, collaboration at the core, and then also the sharing of resources together. And so while a Google Doc sufficed for our annotation of adventure back in the first Critical Code Studies working group, we knew we needed to do more than that. We knew that there was a potential for us, really, for me at least, first introduced by Craig Dietrich in his Magic project, where he was dreaming even before the first Critical Code Studies working group with John Ippolito and others about the potential for annotating code with multimedia elements.
And I think one of the things we're excited to talk about today is both the sort of history and future of that annotation. So the workbench that we developed on top of Scalar with Jessica Pressman is one way that we found useful to attach multi-path media in a scalar fashion to source code when we're annotating it. But there's a long tradition of thinking about multimedia annotation, and also there are a lot of new exciting forms that have yet to be invented. So partly this is the community that should be thinking about what those will look like.
And especially interesting to me, just to build on what Jeremy just said, is the question of, again, where is the critical intervention? Of course, I can imagine the industry reasons for wanting to annotate code, or in terms of software, both development and preservation, sustainability issues and things like that, documentation, archival reasons. But I think with our critical readings, we're imagining that we're doing something else. And again, so one of the things I want us to think about throughout the course of this week's discussion on the thread, and also in this session, is what is productive? What kinds of annotations also create opportunities for for more discussion. And I think I posted already in the thread this sense that I had even when working on border codes, that sometimes it was more productive, again, and maybe an Eisensteinian sense, to create a productive tension between the code that's being displayed and the annotation that you're adding to it. So anyway, these are just some of the things we're thinking about. If you have other questions or comments, we'll be opening it up in just a little bit. But maybe the next thing that we should do is I'm going to ask Jeremy if he will walk us through using ACLS Workbench as a platform for annotating code with 2 multimedia annotations.
Okay, great. Well, let's take a quick look at that, and let me see if I have focus on this. Mark, are you seeing me in the main broadcast window here?
I see you.
Great. All right. And I'm also going to just grab a set of screens here. Here we are. A little animated GIF. So let's go. Let's go into Scalar and also think about it in relationship to. Let's see, not that, but the Critical Code Studies Working Group. So in the past on the group, we've looked at in week 2 with the Code Archaeologies thread. David Berry was encouraging people to look at a live Google Doc with a basic adaptation of the ELIZA source code, a version done by Jeff Traeger. And these annotations in this particular tool are done somewhat in the style of a web-centered Office document annotation format like you would get in Microsoft Word or OpenOffice. But of course, you can respond to comments. You can comments can respond to comments, and you can annotate the code. But what you can't do is attach pictures, video clips, etc., etc. So we're using ACLS Workbench and using one of the templates that's available in ACLS Workbench. Powered by Scalar, as we say, because that's a huge portion of what's under the hood here. We're going into a book that's called the ACLS Workbench / ELIZA, the ELIZA book. And first we uploaded our source code so that we could do some media annotations. So I edited this page right here and created a link to a source code file, which I updated. The source code file is, well, let's take a quick look at it. I'll grab it right here. Here we are. There we are. Let's see, add, and there. All right. So here's the source code file. As you can see, it's a plain text file. And what we did was we added the extension .code to the end of this .txt file and then uploaded it to Scalar. Scalar now knows that it's a source code file, and so it automatically adds line numbers, just as you might in formatting scholarly poetry or anything else, so that you can have references. Now, the basic programming language has its own line numbers, so line number 40, 50, 180, etc. And those line numbers aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily follow a given pattern. So starting at line 1000, we get the programming data, and that's our line 72. So we're going to add annotations, and we're going to add them to the Scalar line Scalar has decreed. So if we wanted to annotate the code, which we see identified within the text file as 2530, we'd annotate Scalar line 206. Mark, did that sound like it made sense?
That's right. And
that's right. And
so I'm getting a little feedback here. So just to be clear, when you're uploading the file with that .code extension, if our code reader on this Workbench end can recognize the language, then it'll do this. Then it'll do this numbering for us. And again, there you can also obviously upload the code as a .txt file, but again, then you don't get those line numbers, and you'll see momentarily why they're crucial to this process.
Yeah, it's very true. So I'm over here looking at this little animated GIF. Mark, you suggested this as our first annotation, and what line were you thinking of for annotating this piece of media to the to Eliza?
Ah, that's very good. So let's see. So over on, now I may not know the actual line number, so let me give you what we have from the Google Doc.
Mm-hmm. Here's the Google Doc.
Let's see. I wanted to annotate line, I think I just chose line 200, which is input $, which is where we're getting the user input.
The user input. Okay,
right.
Great.
That seems like a productive line to
add
that to.
Let's go to line 200. If you can see on my screen, that's line 20 of the file that Scalar has imported. We're going to first use this import content button and upload our image. Which is, I'll just call I Get Words All Day.
Mm-hmm.
GIF, animated GIF of a cinematic scene. I'll be elusive here.
And I probably should give a little bit of context for this particular.
Go ahead.
Quote. So this is a quote from the musical My Fair Lady, the adaptation of George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, and this is Audrey Hepburn delivering this line in the film.
Great. And actually, actually, this is exactly what our description is for. So we could say Hepburn in Pygmalion. Is that an O-N or an A-N here? I'm actually not sure. Well, you can go back and edit it later if
it's an O-N. Says,
yeah. Great. Okay. So we've chosen our file. We've uploaded the file. The media object has been created and is embedded in here. This thing is annotatable in its own right, and we can add media, we can embed it into pages, but most importantly, now that this piece of media is in our system, we can make it an annotation to something else, right? So I think that the most important thing here is that unlike the paradigm for something like Google Docs or Microsoft Word, where we say, well, I'll go to line 200 and then I will click add and add an annotation to it. Scalar thinks backwards about these things. Its approach is actually to say, I will go to the media object and I will make that media object into an annotation.
This is why you need the line numbers again. So good. It's sort of a twofold process. Once you have that page made, either a page with the media object embedded in it, or you have the media object itself, then you go to the code, you write down the line number somewhere, or you have it open in a different tab, so that you can now assign this annotation to that one or more line numbers.
Right. So here I am on the GIF that we uploaded, the Pygmalion, Hepburn's quote in Pygmalion, "I get words all day." And I've clicked on editing that GIF, and I have this to make this a media annotation, specify the media it annotates. And I'm going to go to the ELIZA source code, select it, and then list it as annotating line 20. I could add many other pieces of media that it annotates, but in this case, we've just got one source code file, and we're just looking at one line in that file. So I could also annotate. I could also annotate ELIZA multiple times if I wanted to. This is important. So I could also annotate line 1, for example.
Right.
So let's save.
And again, it's, you know, you're thinking creatively about these. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you can imagine people they're not necessarily scrolling through the code when they're encountering those annotations. They might be reading what Scalar and what Workbench calls a path of argumentation that includes one or more of those annotations. And then they might, so in other words, there's plenty of reasons why you might want to use the same annotation multiple times within code. Or again, as in the case with, you know, Transporter Immigrant Tool or lots of other programs, you might have many files or many text files of code that you're annotating with the same annotation. So
yeah,
anyway,
so
getting back.
Here we go. We've got our annotations. We've got annotations listed here. This media annotates. And if we click over here, when we're back on our source code file, we can see these this blue bar here. When we click on the blue bar, we get the "I get words all day" object, right? This is actually for some reason it's not loading the image right here. Not entirely sure why. But there it is. It's listed as inline media. So we can do this also with a video, and we can do this with pictures. We can do this with video. We can do this with audio clips. All of them will get attached to the source code in different places. And then again, unlike something like inline comments on an Office document, those individual media files, as Mark mentioned, can be strung together into their own paths. They're all kind of equal documents. So before we switch over to a more general conversation, I think one of the things we can think about is the kind of cultural heritage version or the kind of artistic remix version of thinking about source code. What are the original material artifacts the source code was found on? What are the images of the computer hardware that it ran on? Who are these people? Like, do we want to list to file photos or biographical files on Joseph Weizenbaum, for example?
Right. There's, you know, the execution of the code, right? So a video screen capture of that. The people talk, you know, anything media objects relating to the reception of the code,
right?
Or its you know, uptake, its implementation, its re-implementation, links to other code files, right? Where someone has ported this into another language. Again, it was something like ELIZA. The opportunities are endless. We had there's a video of Siri and ELIZA talking, which would be interesting to also also annotate it with. The one thing I want to mention is kind of a suggested practice that I found through working on border codes was I tended to, after creating the media object, I tended to create a page in Scalar, a new page or Workbench, and then I would embed the media object into it. And then I found it useful to, at the top, put the line of code that I was annotating in that page itself, and then a very quick gloss of what that line of code did or meant. Again, I don't know if you are having this problem, but you know, those of us who've been in multiple critical code studies working groups. The challenge is, how quickly can you catch up to speed on what this any one bit of code does, and then from there go into its context and things like that. And so again, we're trying to give the future readers and critics as many handholds as many places to hold on to as possible, so that they can concentrate their work on understanding the significance of the annotation rather than spending their time puzzling through what line of code it is.
Yeah, that's the way in which this is the real trade-off with Scalar, is that it's very flexible, but it sometimes demands more of you in terms of how much editorial work you do putting it together. It's really not, for assembling a really large collection of annotations, it's not an agile tool, right? You're gonna, you click a few times, you fill out a few forms. It's really very robust, but it's very flexible. And so it helps me to think about annotations as endnotes rather than footnotes. A footnote, you expect the text of your commentary will stand on its own, and it'll be in close visual proximity to the thing it's commenting on. With endnotes, on the other hand, if you go to the end of Milton's Paradise Lost, or if you go to the end of a critical edition of Wordsworth's Prelude, and there's an endnote that's commenting on a specific line, it would be really useful to reprint that line at the top of the endnote, right? And that's very much the same thing with Scalar, is that each individual object, like an annotation, is also in some sense intended to stand on its own, which means you do a lot more framing, a lot more excerpting. A good, for me being interested in 20th century metafiction, a good point of comparison is Vladimir Nabokov's Pale Fire, 999-line poem, and then the fictional commentary. Each line of the annotations to that 999-line poem begins by identifying the text that it annotates.
I brought this up once again. I just love Jeremy's explanations. I shouldn't flatter him during these live sessions, but I find those analogies just to be so illuminating. But I want to walk you through just a few sample annotations from the Border Codes book, just to highlight a few of the features we've mentioned. So I'm going to screen share for a moment. Let me see if I can do this. One moment. Okay. See if you can see this window. Is that sharing okay, Jeremy? Or are you seeing black?
Yeah, I can see it just fine.
Okay, so I'm just going to walk through a few of the different types of annotations that I used back in. Again, this is more, this is very much a work in progress, but this is a Scalar book that annotates the transporter immigrant tool code, which is in Java. So for this first one example is just a comment. Here I'm in the GNU Affero general license, just some comments on that. So in those ones, I didn't feel particularly compelled to have to repeat the line of code, again, since we were just in the comments. Here it's annotated with a video. You can see what that looks like. Again, this is Fox News reception to the app itself. Again, so think about really the idea behind this kind of annotation is to allow, and again, in the true sense of what we're trying to go for with critical code studies, a walk through the code to be a walk into a discussion of the code in situ, the code in culture, really, the culture that receives it, the way that it operates. Again, I want to move beyond, challenge us to move beyond just what does this do? But again, sometimes it helps to do that as well. So this line of code is annotated with a video that shows the transporter immigrant tool being used on a phone, because it works on a Motorola phone. Here's what I was talking about with my suggestion of kind of best practices. I've got these import lines, and I've included them once again in the annotation itself. I explain its function briefly, and then there's a commentary that follows. Let me just show you a few more.
And most of these annotations are pages, right?
Right. Most of these are pages because, again, I use them. I threaded them together as parts of larger arguments. This one is another example of something I think we can make much use of that goes to sort of the heart, I think, of what Craig was trying to do with magic. This is an interview with Brett Stahlbaum, who developed the code, and he's commenting on the function that is the ideas behind the function that this line annotates. And then here was an idea. Again, I'll leave off with this one. I've annotated this line of code about whether or not the location is valid with a map of the United States done in 1847, which is in the process of loading. It may not load in time. That talks about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Anyway, you can read the description, but the map was designed to establish a boundary line with due precision upon authoritative maps and to establish upon the ground landmarks which shall show the limits of both republics. And again, obviously a map like this taps into lots of different elements of the project. It taps into the geopolitical project or, national project that the Transporter Immigrant Tool is responding to. It deals with mapping. It deals with the technology that was available at the time. And so I think I was very fond of, again, the image is not loading now, but I think you get a sense of what it might be. I liked the idea of this kind of annotation not being a literal translation of what the code is doing and not even, showing the code in action, but something that that's productive and maybe, I don't know, complicates our reading of the code or enhances our reading of the code in some way.
Mark, if I could jump in here, so the part of the at a technical level, what's for people that are trying to do this, I think the important and interesting thing is that it's not click on a line of code, add a map, and it's not the scalar way of doing things, which is add a map, tell the map that it annotates line 150, right? But in this case, your flow is to, come up with a concept, right, that relates to this map, add the map, put it in a page, and write a bunch of framing text to it that makes that map a complete thought on a separate HTML page, like a blog post, and then make that page an annotation to that line of code, as well as threading that page in with other conversations that paths lead through Scalar. Is that a kind of a good summary?
Yes, that's a very good summary. And so, in fact, and just to highlight that, I can show you if we go to the page where this annotation lives, which I believe is if I go to its permalink, it will take me there. Then it'll take you to that path directly where this annotation lives. Again, you can see that I've got the line of code at the top, the image, which is still loading apparently, and we've got the code that it annotates down below. But as Jeremy was pointing out, this is part of a larger thread. I can go to the next page on this path, for example, and then move through an argument or an interpretation that's built out of these annotations. And again, I think part of the goal with this demo project was to think about ways that we can continue to make critical code studies, again, discussions centered on the code itself, because it's, again, it's very easy to get very far away from the code, and at this point, at least, I find. And so the more encouragement we can have to keep our interpretations close to the code, the better. So one idea I had for the next part, Jeremy, was that we could take a few questions using the QA section of the Hangout, and then after that is done, or even alternatively, we could see if there are people who are of our viewers who want to become part of the conversation, and we can just invite them into the call. Would you think that sound good to you?
Absolutely. I'm totally open to inviting everyone in as can. Do you want to check email and text, or check the forum to see if anyone wants to join? And
maybe it's good, since we've got the question window open on the side, if you want to join the conversation live, if you want to post that as a question, that might work.
Absolutely, yeah. Use the QA channel or use the chat channel, and in case nobody's chomping at the bit to be part of a live stream this morning, some people may be following following in casual wear.
Right.
Then let's just also frame what we're thinking about for the next half hour of discussion, which is kind of the history and future of code media annotation and also annotating code with media and code as, which I think are closely related topics. Both card, we could say that the punch card is an artifact, right? It is already mediated, and also the memex. So I heard you wanted to some pictures so that you could annotate pictures with your pictures, right? That kind of these paradigms of not just imagining code as only text and not just imagining code annotation as attaching text to text, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, can you talk about your ideas with the punch card, with the Jacquard loom, and with, I don't know, where that leads you, thinking about the materiality of code?
Well, this is really partly about the materiality of, well, it's partly data and it's partly execution, right? There's always that line that we get into where the two things blur, and we can define them. We can define them different ways, but to take the more data end, I think back to the hanging Chad presidential election Florida debates of a few election cycles ago, when suddenly punch cards, have been with us, as the Jacquard loom uses punches to define its operations in producing textiles, right? Punch cards were used in mainframes, but in this case, punching marks out of ballots had been a common technology for for a long time for producing polling data, like for the presidential election. Data, not algorithm, right? But then you would process the fact that it turns out that punch cards are materially ambiguous, right? That they sometimes they can be the punch can be off center between two things, or it can be halfway in, or there can be this thing called a hanging Chad, a little tiny window of paper that has been closed back up again, or is partly still attached, etc., etc., etc. So to me, that gives a window into the idea, not just to say well, magnetic media are more complicated than ones and zeros, they're voltage differences, but also to say what are the ways in which media-specific analyses of code becomes possible when we acknowledge the fact that it's mediated. There's some very, very interesting software programs that were distributed on phonograph records, if we want to take a media archaeology, or we can just think about the way that they circulate. GitHub is a very, very specific interfaces to software, and screenshots to the kinds of software programs that people use to interact with those repositories can often tell you more about software culture than just pretending that they're abstract alphanumeric documents floating in space, right? So it's not just about the fetish of a Jacquard loom punch card or a phonograph record that has a trash 80 piece of software on the B side. It's LP, not phonograph. but also, you know, software interfaces. Like how are people who are using public open source projects, how are they actually interacting with the code that they create? And that's not it's not an abstract textual document. It's usually an integrated development environment and or a web service, or command lines, etc.
And apropos of Tenprint, I did want to show the PDF of the issue of Creative Computing, 1977, in which Steve North features the code, and of course in Tenprint and in other places we talk about the culture of computing in which code was being shared through magazines like Creative Computing, and the people would have to type in from the magazine in the process of learning the potential for using computers in different ways.
Yeah, this is I definitely remember typing programs into basic programs in particular out of magazines in this sort of diskette by mail era, which which at the time I was young enough that I often needed help with typing. So the interface to some of these objects was for me to read out loud to my aunt and not try to make mistakes while she was typing for me. A kind of a special kind of hell that she was subject to visiting our family over the holidays was, how would you like to have software read to you for half an hour while your tiny nephew tries to create a program that works?
Now, I seem to be. So Damon I got an email from Damon that says that he's not able to see the QA channel. So let me see if I can. It should be, if you mouse over on the left-hand side, well, at least of my version of Chrome from the broadcaster standpoint, you should be able to open it up, but I wonder if other people are not able to see it as well. Damon, you can email me back, but we can also invite you to be just one of the participants on the call if you prefer that.
I would say
or you can
also just add him if you like, sir. I think Judy might also be out there. It's just people who are excited to join in the conversation can just also send ad requests.
Okay. Do you think I should just add it? I should just add those people since I know they're here already, or will that be bad? They can always turn off their cameras.
Just someone who contacts you.
Okay.
But,
so the other question we had too, I think, was about other software that's available for annotation. And I think a while ago somebody suggested, or back when we talked about this, I can't remember if it was on the Haystack forum or somewhere else, we talked about the possibility of using the software development platforms themselves, like Eclipse, for the place where the annotations would happen, to really be in the space where the programmers are creating their software. I don't know if people have preferences or ideas about that, or if we feel like we even need new and greater platforms for annotating and sharing code. That may also be the case.
It's an interesting idea in a way, because there are publications in in the ACM, there are publications in computer science following out of say the traditions of literate programming. That for some people, this idea of attaching maybe multimedia infographics, things like that, to source code was always an intuitive way, not of doing cultural studies on code, but of simply just doing the job of professional software engineering and saying, well, you should attach a screenshot of how this function, what does this function do and where can you see it doing it? Here are some mock-ups we developed. As you're writing the code, attach the mock-ups to the functions where, to clarify what it is you're attempting to do. And this kind of documentation first or documentation best approach being multimedia, there were a number of proposals. So I could imagine a set of interfaces, kind of like the comment press extension to WordPress for Eclipse, things like that. There may be a few things that already exist. The thing that I am familiar with that exists, not being a kind of a professional software developer in this space, are mostly code analytic tool packages. It's so if you're interested in reviewing hundreds of thousands or millions of lines of source codes, and you want to get source code bar graphs, charts, things having to do with check-ins, dates on when things changed, etc., then those tools are already available, but often they're really about abstracting and summarizing really enormous things, really large programs. They're not always about attaching extra documentation to a particular line.
Okay, I'm inviting Damon right now. I've actually invited Damon, Damon Lauren Baker, Judy Malloy, and David Berry and Craig Dietrich, who I know are watching. If anybody else is watching and you want to email me, I will add you as well. There's Damon. He's just joined us. Welcome, Damon. He's muted right now. Let me unmute him, or he has to unmute himself.
Well, he can jump in as can.
Okay.
But the idea that this has a there he is.
No, hey. So first off, can everyone hear me? And am I not?
He can jump in as can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm hearing a weird echo.
The idea that this has a there he is.
No, hey. So first off, can everyone hear me? And am I not?
He can jump in as can. Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm hearing a weird echo.
The idea that this
looks like an infinite loop there for a little bit.
Damon's maybe calling us from 3 to 10 seconds in the past.
Yeah, this is not going to work.
You want to type in the chat though?
Yeah.
Great. This is the one problem with video call infrastructure is lag. It's definitely worse than gaming. Great. I see Damon's in the group chat here. So as he's adding things into the discussion, the big framing question then is we've kind of got two directions we could be looking at this. One is the history of rich media annotation in general and in code specifically, and the other is kind of these imagined future directions for what this would look like. We have some models. We have some ideas of what could be possible, but it's also connected to I mentioned in the post for this week HyperCard. Partly this hypermedia hypertext paradigm of attaching video clips and sound files and text objects, etc., together to make a web of sense. Is a basic idea that you would think would be so natural to apply to code, one of the fundamental cultural objects of computer culture and software society, and yet weirdly we're hypermedia linking almost every imaginable cultural object in social media, but code is often not treated in that way.
So Damon's typing his question. I would like to also mention while he's typing this that if there are those of you out there who don't yet have access to ACLS Workbench, we'll be sending out an email around to tell you how to set up an account, and you can join the ELIZA book with us, in addition to continuing to participate in the discussions and annotating the live Google Doc. Okay, so I'm going to read you some of Damon's question now as it's coming through. So Damon writes, okay, so the question of using IDEs or other programming tools makes a lot of sense to me as a programmer. Like there are languages I can program in professionally with an IDE that I couldn't write out on a blackboard. Color coding and lookup of definition of functions are pretty much vital just for programmers to make the thing suspense. Then there's a little dot dot dot. I bet it's legible. I bet it's gonna be legible. Legible.
Okay, so
Much less for a scholar. Oh, I see. That was the end of that phrase. Much vital just for programmers to make the thing, much less for a scholar to come along later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this, I mean, the idea that an IDE, it has syntax highlighting, it has code completion, it has, I think I'm on the right track here. That if you're in an integrated development environment, an IDE, then it's an assistive tool for producing code. You want to write the name of one of the functions you've already created. You start to rate it, and it will always make sure that you spell the name of that function correctly and format it correctly, underscores instead of dashes, etc. So it's also a kind of a set of consistency enforcing mechanisms. In Lexical, it interfaces you to libraries. So if I'm following your thought, Damon, then...
And Damon adds, and it is part of the code in many ways.
Oh, that the IDE is part of the code, yes. And so in that sense, if I'm following this thought, there are two conclusions we could draw for that would argue for doing code annotation in an IDE extension. One of them is that an IDE is already about making the presence of the code fully available. Anywhere you are, it could suggest everywhere else in the code that's related to the line you're annotating, because it's already, in some senses, for that, constantly indexically referencing you to the shape of the code and the way it's connected. And on the other hand, as you let me add that to our chat here too. It is also part of the code. That like a platform, you know, if I'm developing on a given piece of hardware on an operating system in an IDE, if you're in VI or if you're in Eclipse or Emacs, then all of that code is the genomic situation in which the genetics of the code arose. So it also might be part of the object of study. That idea that just like keeping manuscript variora of Finnegan's Wake, we might want to capture the IDE situation of a piece of software as it's developed and look at the code through that lens, in the same way that Emily Dickinson's that handwriting, that TypeScripts are interesting.
I'm going to try the audio here just for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Is it actually working? Everything's good? Cool. Awesome. I'm not hearing weird echoes and loops now, right? No, not right. Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. So yeah, basically, that's the idea of saying is like the IDE is so important to the creation of the code that it is part of the code. I often use features that are built into the IDE to make the code and involve them. You know, like I couldn't do it without it. So often, some of the IDEs include software functions that get called into it. If you start using a lot of the Java tools, often have a bunch of built-in like widget creation toolkits and stuff like that. So like, you know, like the source code that you have that's the Java code or whatever language it is really only a small fraction of it. And again, if you try to come back and look at it later, like you wouldn't be wouldn't be able to make sense of it. Like you'd want the whole like Eclipse project file plus the version of Eclipse that they use with it and things like that to be able to go back and make some sort of sense out of it. I mean, I've had to do this just for purely pedestrian paying my bills as a programmer way kind of things, trying to recreate somebody's work and having to go back through and set up the version of the IDE they had just to make it go. So much less make a deep understanding of cultural stuff about it, like just to compile the stupid thing. So.
Damon, if I could ask you a question about that, because I've been speaking speaking to people who I don't spend a lot of time in, or I spend almost no time in a sort of a professional software development environments. I'm more of a script kiddie when I'm writing anything. But even for people farther outside this, when you mention kind of sort of wizards, generators, tools that Eclipse will use to create or configure blocks of code as you're developing it, I had a conversation once where I'm not sure if this is a good metaphor, but I was explaining to someone in the arts, I was talking about Duchamp's urinal. I was saying if you wanted to materially analyze that piece, then one of the things that might be helpful is to know the difference between the aspects of it that were ready-made and the aspects of it that weren't, right? That's actually one thing you'd say is that Duchamp goes and gets this object. He doesn't sculpt the object, right? Similar for so is partly the ability to study the IDE affordances and know what parts of the code were generated, what parts of the code were drop-in, and what parts of the code were created to that purpose by the author. Is that one of the
that's definitely one of the things there. I mean, like a lot of the tools that I've used, like an example, the cave writing software that's now being rewritten at Brown, that I was involved with the writing of it. There's a XML schema. This gives you an idea of how old it is. XML schema that's generated by one piece of software that's read by another piece of software that generates a user interface based off the schema, so we can make changes to this. So it makes no sense when you actually go through and read the thing. It makes definitions that are crazy. Like it says, here's going to be an object. Okay, everything coming after this is going to be an object. Okay, this thing, it's an object. Okay, this object we just described, guess what? It's an object, and like it does this like craziness in it. We're beating that out of it there, but it was totally non-intentional because we weren't really looking at it. No human being actually. It basically worked. It ran fast enough. Everything was acceptable. We had other bugs to fix, and we moved on from it. And if you knew the tool set we were using, you would look at it and go, "Oh, that's what was happening." As opposed to if you were taking a look at the crazy XML file format, you'd be like, were these people on drugs? So that's yeah.
Well, and I think, Damon, that this really speaks back to week 1 of the working group this year, where Chris Lindgren was leading the discussion by presenting some code to us that was used in the wild, having us look at it totally out of context, trying to figure out what was going on, and then remarking that without knowing the development context under which this code came about, that we are sort of stumbling around blind. And so again, from my point of view, for these sorts of projects, that's why it's so important, if we have the people who put the program together still alive and around with us, to go and have those conversations, not purely for ethnographic reasons, but first of all so that they can be a tour guide for us through that code and talk to us about some of that, the insanity, some of the patches, some of the getting it up and running right in the moment, coding that had to be done just to make the thing work by the deadline, given the resources that were available.
And to draw back to the previous critical code studies workshop, we did a lot of work on the Flowmatic code.
Right, by Grace Hopper.
And the big thing is there's things in it that don't make sense if you don't understand how reel-to-reel tape recorders work. It's doing a trick where it rolls the thing off the reel, and it's very subtle, and it's very important, so you don't get your data rewritten over it. And if you haven't worked with a reel-to-reel recorder, because I worked at a radio station and I had to record audio stuff. They were very backwards about things, so I happened to have worked with them. But if I hadn't, that would be utterly mysterious to me. And it was a very tiny little bit of logic, but a lot of thought had been put into it. And you can just shrug your shoulders and go, it was just there for a reason, but really without that knowledge of the stuff that isn't code but is part of the system that runs the code. So I think that's like an analogy to that. So in this case, we don't have to keep tape recorders around. We can keep a copy of Eclipse that they use with it, along with the project file for the software, and keep that. We have little bit better archival ability than like keeping stacks of working tape recorders from the 1940s around. So.
And part of this, I mean, this is a big discussion in preservation, archiving, and dissemination in areas like electronic literature or working with contemporary computing cultural objects in general. Dini Grigar is maintaining a lab with versions of computers that
right. Laurie Emerson.
You've got your Commodore 64 and these sort of preservation interfaces. But on the other hand, if we think about the paradigm of media annotation, then maybe, and this is almost like interactive museum kiosk design here, that you're saying, well, at what point would a little clip of a reel-to-reel tape recorder running, or a page of a reel-to-reel instruction manual explaining this particular issue, at what point would that image or that video clip attached to this line of code serve as a reasonable supplement or even a reasonable replacement for having the physical object available and actually going through the entire process of trying to get the code to run in that original environment? So when is the sort of annotated critical edition a good enough interface to helping someone rapidly understand what this thing is in a media-rich way?
Well, first off, I just realized that I made Mark do what you described that you did to your aunt, which was read stuff that I was typing and then have to type it in. And so that was sort of amusing.
That's okay. I'm your Milton's daughter. That's fine.
Yeah.
So the other thing though is that going back with the Flowmatic one, the Flowmatic code was designed as a piece of promo material to get you to use Flowmatic. So it was designed for people who didn't have it. So it was an advertisement. It was designed to be the killer app to show, which was a really boring merge sort thing between two reels, but it's the kind of stuff at the time was a big deal. So that one was uniquely representable because it was designed as a piece of advertisement for a thing that maybe didn't actually exist.
It was designed to stand alone. Right. Yeah. And speaking of this, only because we're coming up against the end time a little bit, I do want to mention not the end times, but the end of our session here. And I certainly hope we continue the discussion throughout the thread itself. But we do have another Workbench book, speaking of advertisements, for Flowmatic that's under development. And if there's anybody who's out there in the working group who wants to join in on that, then we can also put some time and attention. Damon has found just unbelievable amounts of numbers of resources and materials related to Flowmatic during that last working group. Also, we had Evan Buswell helping us on that one. So again, that's another place where we hope to pour some of our attention and build out that as a scalar book for starters, a Workbench book for starters.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that part of what's exciting to me about this situation is the combination of the fact that this is a golden moment for media archaeology in general, right? So things like Flowmatic are amazing examples of things that we should give more attention to, and we should be doing this kind of accumulation, creation of editorial, annotation, interpretation, commentary, in order to situate them and understand them. And also, at the same time, that there are exciting the source code of tomorrow and a month from now and a year from now is, I think, just as exciting to tackle as the source code from 1, 2, 3, 4 decades ago. That there will be new strange viruses, new unique examples in cyber war, new things leaked by organizations like Anonymous or WikiLeaks. New kinds of capture devices. A recent debate that I've seen in the last week or two had to do with the binge-on algorithm by T-Mobile and debates over whether or not that algorithms or that set of web services is a form of throttling that's currently illegal under U.S. regulation. And the question of So the question of media annotation is a part about these punch cards, these reel-to-reel tape recorders, these manuscripts. My cat doesn't like the T-Mobile binge-on algorithm. But it's also, this rich multimedia understanding of software and technoculture is also it's also about the issues of today and tomorrow. So I think it's an exciting time to be working in these new idioms when you're working with software.
Just running up on time on here. I hope also that now, if we can, as developers, be more conscious about making stuff that could be amenable to this kind of study in the future. Now that there are people doing this kind of study, it would behoove us to make our tools and what we do more analyzable, if we care about what we're doing.
More legible. Obviously, from a software development point of view, that's crucial to sustainability. But as long as there are computers, as long as there are people building things in commercial settings where they have limited time, limited resources, all sorts of other pressures, there's going to be code that people put together for one time. They think for one-time use. That's going to be just good enough for now, just readable enough for them while they're in that moment, maybe not to even them 3 months from now. And, I feel like as people who are looking at culture through code, that's just something that's part of life that we will have to learn to deal with, and that's part of what we're talking about. It's part of, there's best practices and best practices in just about every enterprise, and then there's what happens. And I think critical code studies has interesting points to make about what happens and why and what's meaningful about that.
Yeah, definitely.
It's this one-time situation. I also want to mention for people who are part of this community that are more in the literature, arts, video games, interactive entertainment. Maybe they're a little bit less interested in software culture, in nonfiction, in the sort of sociological or engineering dimensions, but not to be a booster about this, but just to think about some of the implications. There's a recent article that grabbed my attention. Had to do with Google opening its smartphone-based store for books that cannot be printed, right? Very, very simple, very, very easy concept. The announcement came out, I believe, in the past week, and so these objects don't necessarily, they're going to be as radically ephemeral as any electronic literature works of art or any computational happenings of the past few decades, but they're also becoming major cultural categories. And it's possible that for people who follow these things, the basic ability to video document them, the way that the archiving virtual worlds or the way that ELO Pathfinders has approached them, to be able to annotate their source code with moments of screenshots or things explaining what the objects do, the ability to attach them to a rich media context showing the kinds of physical devices, the kinds of websites where they were available for sale, the way that annotating a page interacted with the social dimension. Just these very simple multimedia annotative gestures may be the kinds of practices that scholars in this area need to learn just to be able to actually understand, write about, and preserve an understanding of any of these cultural objects, because none of them will be accessible or available
or sufficient
after they drop.
Right. So, we started, I think, maybe by talking about code as being the text that we're writing about, and then realizing that code is just, one little small, the source code that we have, that little text file is just one little small part of what we're, it's one thread that we're pulling on at the particular moment. It's kind of a nice moment to bring everything back around to ELIZA and point out that, here we are writing about this doctor script that runs on the MadSlip ELIZA software, and yet we still haven't been able to find the source code for ELIZA itself. I do have some leads on a possible set of boxes that are about to be hopefully entered into MIT's archives that may contain it, but it could be somewhere else out there, and maybe someone watching this video will be able to find that, and that would be wonderful. But I think Jeremy's comment also speaks on not just the challenges to the archives, but also in the archaeological enterprise, but also just recognizing the partiality of all of this kind of critical work that we're doing. We only have these fragmentary objects that even any one single piece of code that participates in just a much broader set of systems and an ecology of a moment that's being documented, but again, only in little snapshots. And again, for me, the multimedia annotation of this is not just in terms of trying to create the variorum of every single code object, but again, a kind of creative response to the question, what is significant when it comes to this code? What other objects speak to this code? All right, we should probably wrap up now. Jeremy, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we headed out? Or Damon, of course.
Well, yeah, I'd say a last thought for me is that part of media annotation and code is going to be a really big cultural conversation. It may go somewhere, it may not, but it will extend far beyond academic research and particular tiny communities of practice. But to me, one of the unique things that a largely academic and community of practice group like Critical Code Studies has to offer is a sense of history and a vision. So a thing that I would love to see this community crowdsource out of its own personal crowd is a really rich understanding of how we have already annotated code and envisioned its annotation, and a really rich kind of imagining of how we are currently doing it and how we would like to do it in the future. And I think the projects, the collections, the demo pieces, and the platforms will all kind of arise and grow out of that kind of shared imagining of what's possible.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, also to note the way in which this annotation fulfills just as a writing teacher, I guess I'm thinking about the rhetoricians among us. This is part of thinking through the code, that act of annotating. It's the idea board that you create. It's your associations that are productive for you, and again that we articulate through the rest of our writing and the rest of our scholarly practice and our creative practice as well. All right, well, with that, I think I do have to bring us around to conclusion. Thanks to all of us who joined us. Thanks, Damon, for participating live with us. Those of you who are out there watching, and if you're watching this video after the fact or really after we're dead, we appreciate your viewership. But also, more importantly, those of you who are still in the working group, the week 4 threads are live right now, and we'll be running those in the rest of the working group through the end of next week, so you'll have some time to catch up on the discussions. And as I mentioned, we will be sending around some directions in the next little while to those of you who still haven't created accounts on ACLS Workbench, so you can get in and join one of these projects or one of these books, maybe reading ELIZA with us, or perhaps reading Flowmatic with us, or perhaps there's some set of code that you are really inspired to pursue and annotate that you'd like to explore through ACLS Workbench. All right, Jeremy, anything else?
That's it. Signing off.
All right, signing off. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Take care.